All right, this video is going to cover Lab 10, which is file input and output. I'll also quickly go over command line arguments, which we will use to sort of get into our program and test the program. Often giving it a command line interface makes it a lot easier to test with. You don't have to write another Python script to test it or just dump things in main, which is helpful sometimes. So we'll start out um, by checking out Lab 10. All right, so we checked it out, have some files, and I'm doing this in my public directory. So this is the same as ACOS public CF1 Lab 10. So I'll add that link to Canvas when I finished up here. And so you can see that's where it is. So you can see the contents of this lab directory. We have a README, which has the instructions, but I've also got up here in Canvas file io.py, which is our assignment file. Number.txt has a bunch of numbers in it. Text file.txt has some words in it. It just has, if you can read it, obviously it explains. It has some you can use to practice reading and writing. I kind of like to use the same file that I'm writing to use when we're just testing just generic string functions like this one calls for. Makes me feel like I'm doing something special. You may not feel the same way. So let's hop in file io.py. So we've got a blank file. Let's drop this. The first thing we want to do, we're going to operate this. We want to be able to have our little library of functions, and then we also want to be able to call our functions from the command line. So to do that, that's what the if name guard does for us. Type it correctly. And we'll drop it in the main function. It's conventional. And this is what we're going to do. So to get command line arguments, we have to pull them. Python, we can add a library in Python that will allow us to pull the command line arguments. You may have seen this in the last assignment. This time we're going to go over depth. So that comes from the sys library. Let's import sys, and we'll just leave it as is. And then we'll just call it from it. And the only thing we're concerned about with sys is sys.argv. This stands for argument vector. That's kind of a holdover from kind of C programs where your main function in those, which was kind of where you launched, or Python just launches wherever. But in C, they would have you had to have exactly one main function, and the main function had kind of integer, counter, and a vector here. So the name is just a holdover from that. So basically, it's just a list of arguments, and the first element is always the name of the file that you're in. So we are in file io.py. So sys.argv 0, the 0th index of that, is going to be the name of the Python. So this would be file io.py. Okay. If you wanted to see what other kind of sys things there were, you can just search for Python sys, and then Google. It's usually one of the top 5 that if you search for Python plus the name of a library, it's there. So argv's here. You can see there's other stuff. Some things like you probably don't have a lot of use for. Gives you hash information, kind of things that Python uses to do calculations or to reserve memory is in here, as well as some sort of system interfacey things like the like the command line interface that we have here. But in this case, we just want to use arg vector. So what we want to do is, so if you call with nothing, you just have one argument. So let's go ahead and we want to print a basic usage statement in case it is, so we know what we need to type. So we kind of have a good idea here. So we'll check for that. The easiest way to do this, we're always going to require for this function, we're always going to require a function name and a file name for all 4 of these. So we want there to be, the name of the file plus 2. So we want there to be at least 3 arguments all the time. So if there's not 3 arguments, then we want to print a usage statement. And then we want to exit. And it's not necessarily an error. In this case, we won't give a non-zero exit value. Let's go ahead, statement here, usage, and we will say sys.argv0 to be the name of the file, and that'll mean, if you change it somehow, it'll go with whatever you called it as. And then we care about the function name, and then the file that we're going to operate off of. And then we'll have another line that gives us functions, and we have what? Head of file, tail of file, word count, and stats. And so get happy with the scrolling. And so at this point we have a functioning program. It doesn't do very much, but let's go ahead and play with it. Make sure it's doing what I think it's supposed to be doing. Okay. So quickly you notice, like, we're not getting graded on this. The available functions kind of hides from the usage. So I'm just going to indent that a little bit, but otherwise it tells us the different things that we're going to be expected to know. So I'm happy with that. Okay, so now it comes down to here. At this point, we've determined that we have 3 arguments. The first one is the name of the Python file. And then, so we're just going to assume the second and third one are the function and the file. So let's go ahead and just say, turn them into words rather than list elements. This helps with clarity. So grab the first one. There's 0 index. The first is 0, second is 1. And then file name, sys.argv, just to up 1. And if we want to do a quick test just to make sure, we'll print our function and our file name just to make sure it's doing what we expect. So if we print it like this, what we did before is still going to give us the usage statement, but let's say just 1 and 2, it'll give us 1 and 2. So we've identified, we've got them in the correct order, get rid of that. And then kind of quick and dirty, we'll go ahead and just say, we'll check if our function is equal to, and we're just going to refer them to head of file, tail of file, word count, stats. That's the idea. You know what? Instead of printing all these, there's nothing special when we call these functions. We don't have to expose the functions as what they are. So let's go ahead and give short names, kind of shorten what we have to type. For head of file and tail of file. And so these are what we're going to look for, and then we're going to map them to the required function names that we have here. So our function is equal to head to do something. Actually, we want to call head of file, our file name, our function is equal to tail of file name. If our function is equal to word count, and if finally our function is equal to stats, word, autopilot here, stats, file name. So we're just passing the file name into all the functions. They all require just that one argument, file name, file name, file name, file name. You'll notice I didn't write elifs all the way here. In this case, we really all we're doing is we're taking the function kind of as a command. It's kind of a command model of a command line argument. And function can only equal one thing. So all of these are they're all mutually exclusive. So the elifs, we're never gonna, two of these are never gonna be equal to the same thing because we're not modifying function in here. So we don't have to type the ls. If we wanted to, we can. I just didn't. Okay, so at this point, we should be working through each one of these, and we don't have functions, so it would just be an error once it gets there. Let's go ahead and start writing them. Let's say we'll start with head of file. And we'll take our file name here, indent our 4 spaces. So if you think about it, the head of file, if you look at this as our sort of template file. And so if the head of file, we're reading the file from the file, pass it as the parameter, print only the first 5 lines. So we want to print exactly. So if we were looking at this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this would be what you printed. This would be the first 5 lines that we printed. So that's what we would want to do if this were the input file. So to do that, we have to sort of step 1 is open the file, and then we want to read and print the first 5 lines. Okay. So before we do this, let's just go ahead and we'll read it in. Let's print all of the lines. So there's a couple different ways. I have my inputs and output here for Python. Let's see, reading and writing files. So if you want to open a file, you just say file is equal to open file name, and the second argument is the mode. So this is writing mode, R would be reading mode. Those are open as a built-in function. So if you go to the built-ins page, it's there, and it'll tell you the mode is equal to R. It's the second one. There's also some other things here that we do not need. And so you can do that, and then if you open it, you should close it after you're done. So close is a method on the file, like you saw in the lecture for this week. The supported way, and you can see it's even like the first way that it tells you to read a file is you use this with open. And what the with does is it sort of creates a scope where anytime everything that's inside its scope, everything that's indented past it within its block, it will all get executed, and at the end, Python guarantees that it will take care of it. So if you don't close it, it'll be fine. If it'll close it at the end and flush the buffers. If there's an error, it'll still close it for you at the end. So pretty much, unless you have an incredibly good reason for not using it, you should always be using with. Probably while in your time ISU, it's likely you won't have a reason not to use it. So we'll just go ahead and start from that at the beginning. So syntax changes a little bit. So you say with open, and then it gives it as. I like to call it file. And open it, and now we want to reprint the first 5 lines. Like I said, let's go ahead and just start. If we look at, let's see, the file object. Methods of file objects, right? So it has read, where it'll just give you, either give you the entire file, or it'll give you a certain number of bytes of the file, a certain number of characters. But it also has read line, and that looks like we're concerned with, reading and printing a certain number of lines. So let's go ahead and just kind of read a single line. If you kind of scroll down, you can see there's other, you can list F, or you can read all of the lines. In this case, we only want 5. So if we wanted to read all the lines, let's go ahead and verify we can print that. So for each line in file.readlines, let's go ahead and print that, and then that's all we'll do for right now. And we want to head needs a file. So we give it our file. And so we're printing the whole file, and it looks right, except it's got all these extra lines in between. So what that tells me is that when you read a line, by default, it gives you the entire line along with the new line character. So we wanted to amuse ourselves, get rid of it. Let's tell print not to add a new line character to its output, and then we get the file that we're written here, our updated changes and everything. But this is not what we really care about. We really only need to read 5 lines. So that changes it. So rather than iterating over all of the lines, let's just go ahead and for line number in, let's go ahead, let's go Python recommended syntax. We just want 5. Get rid of this loop. We'll set our line to be equal to file.readline. And then we want to just go ahead and print it. All right, this prints not returns. Yeah, no return value, prints the first 5 lines. Let's go ahead and print our line. And yeah, does read line come with a new line? It does. So strip it, and then we're expecting up to sort of this space. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so it seems to be doing what we want. Oh, other has read. So our next function that we have is tail. So tail seems similar. Make sure that function tail of file. And so we're going to do, if we think about it, if we're going to read the tail, we would be interested 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the last 5 lines of it. We can't really do this. All we're given is the file name. We don't know how many lines are in it. So really, we just kind of have to look at all the lines. And we can, there's a couple different ways we can do it, right? We could individually, if you look at the file methods that there are, you can read certain characters. And so But really, if you think about it, the simplest thing would be is if we just look at all the lines and we just take the last 5. Now in Python, remember when I said we looked at, the first thing we did was we read all of the lines and it gave us a list that we could iterate over. So if we could go ahead and do that, and then use kind of a list function to give us the last 5, that would be the easiest way of doing it. So first things first, let's go ahead and open our file. We'll do it the same way. Consistent. So we now have a file handle to operate on. And let's go ahead and start with reading all the lines again for line. And we can even say lines is equal to file.readLines. So at this point, lines is a list of strings, each line with a new line appended at the end. And then we can say for line and lines, let's print our line, getting rid of the new line. So let's run this. Instead of head, we'll grab tail. So at this point, we're expecting, and let's switch to the sample file. So it prints the sample file. You can cat out it to sort of convince yourself they're the same. So that we can be convinced that each line is, we're getting all the lines in there. Really, we only care about the last 5. So if this is a list of strings and we want to grab only the last 5. So if we wanted the first 5, we could do 0 and grab 5 or grab 5, right? Let's do a Python. So list is equal to, let's review list 4, 5. So that's our list. If we grab, 0, that gives us the first one. If we grab a slice from 0 to 2, right, it gives us, it goes 0 inclusive to 2 exclusive. So it goes 0, 1, 2, but it doesn't include this one. So it gives 1, 2. If you move that along, that'll just give us 2. And if we just do this, it still gives us 1, 2. So 0 is assumed if it's not there. But in the same way that you can kind of go from the front, in Python, it will also let you go backwards in the list. So if we wanted the last item, you go from -1 to the end, and it's going to give you 5. You go -2 until the end, it'll give you 4 and 5. So if we want the last 5 items, you give -5 here, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's what we want to do with our list, right? We have a list of strings. Each string is a line, and we want the last 5 of them. So our -5 to the end, that gives us our last 5. And we care, so for each line in our last 5 lines, let's go ahead and print it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it would be from 2 all the way down here. File, tail. So we're expecting everything from the 2 all the way down, which it seems to be doing. So what would happen though, when you do something like that, we want to check to make sure that it works as you expect. So what if we have a file that only has 1 line? Hello. What happens then? Does it all go horribly wrong? not. It gives us the hello in the final line. So it seems to be doing okay, so it handles it exceptionally well. It handles the overflow for us, and we don't have to do anything special. So we've got 2 of the 4 done. We'll go ahead and we'll do word count as well. And familiar with now, let's go ahead and open up our file for reading. And for this one, we really do want to iterate over all of our lines. So let's go ahead and grab all of them. And for each line in lines, we need to do something. So if we want to count the words, let's go ahead and assumption. I don't think we. Cool. So a word is any series of non-white space characters. This is what I'll grade over. So if we look at, symbols, parentheses, punctuation, anything, letters are all words. So this would all be a word. Def would be a word. This would not be a word, being a space. So what can happen there? So if we look at this, these as lines in a file, when can you have spaces? You can have spaces before words, in between words, and at the end of words. So if we wanted to count, if we're going along, when do we know? We don't care about these, right? There's no words to be counted. It's only once we actually start seeing a word do we care. So when we get to a white space afterward, that's when we care. So in that case, really all we have to keep track of is, are we currently in a word? And if we're in a word and we're seeing another character, right, we don't really have to do anything. All we're doing is just knowing if we are counting a word, and we need to know when it ends. So we know when it ends when we get a space. So basically all we have to do is we have to go over each character in the line, and when we see a letter, we just assume that we're assume we begin or continue assuming we're in a word. If we see a space, we have to make a decision. If we were in a word already, we increase our count, and we say we're not in a word anymore. Otherwise, we just say we're not in a word anymore. Like right here, we're not in a word, not in a word, not in a word. And we want to print the count at the end after we're done with the file. So go ahead and add this. Our count will be 0. And once we're done, we will print our count. So if we don't see any words, we're still going to print 0. And type all the characters correctly. Okay, so here we are, we're iterating. So we have a line, and now we need to go over each character in the line. And the words kind of will span, there's a new line at the end of every line, so we won't have words spanning lines. So our count will sort of be encompassed inside this line here. So let's say in word is equal to false to start with. And then let's go ahead and say for each character in line, so this will hop through each character. And what did we say? We said whenever we need to make a decision anytime we're in, anytime that we see a space. We also have to make sure that we know when we're in a word. So we do have to do something if it's not a space. But let's go ahead and use the isWhitespace isSpace function. if this is the case, we need to make a decision on whether to count, whether to increase our count. And if it's not a space, that means it's a punctuation or a letter or anything else. We just want to affirm or reaffirm that we are, in fact, in a word. So at the end, we will always not be in a word after this. Make a decision on whether to increase count. And really, that's just, are we already in a word? If we are in a word, add 1 to our count. And if we're not in a word, we don't need to do anything. We don't need to subtract, and the count just stays the same. Character in line, so I did that, and now we want to test this. So the easy way of testing it is to, so we have, we have we have those files, but we also have our only one line. That's 2. And it's really only got 1 word in it, right? So that we know the count is. So let's go ahead. Rather than do this, let's go ahead and give it a couple words. 3 words. Space at the end, space at the beginning. So when we run this, we should have 3 words for 7 if we have 2 lines. So word 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now we have something that we can test that we should know the answer to. What were those functions? Yes, word count. And I want to give it only 1 line. 7. If I add another 1, I expect it should go up by 1. If I remove 1, it would go down. So it looks like it's doing something correct. And it's also handling, you see, there's no new line character here, but Python sort of wraps 1 in us. So gives us 1 even if there isn't 1 at the end of the line. So it sort of sets this up for us. We don't have to check for the condition where we get to the end of a file stream and we have to judge what happens outside of it. If it didn't do that, all we would have to do is outside of this loop, we would do 1 more check to see if we were in a word and we would add it if not. But because read lines gives us a new line no matter what, whether there's 1 there or not, we don't have to do that. Okay, so that's 3 of the 4 functions. The last function we have is stats, and I'm going to leave this one mostly up for you to do for the rest of the week. If we go over and look, you're supposed to read numbers from a file, 1 per line, and print the smallest, largest, and average. The mean average, not the median. So no return value on the function. Just go ahead and print the smallest, largest, and average. And take a look at the working version that we have for the output. So you should format it to look like what it looks like there. And so in this case, it's reading numbers from a file. So we've provided you with this number.txt, so this has numbers in it. So in your case, you're going to want to add all these, you're going to want to read all these numbers and put them in a list. And you can put them in a list if you would like, but you need to, keep track of the smallest and the biggest and the average. And remember, the average is, you can compute the average by a sum of all of these divided by the total number of all these. So you don't need to put them in a list if you don't want. You can as you go along if you would like. And so, remember when you're opening your file and you're reading each one of these numbers, we will only have one number per line. So you can just go ahead and use the int function to wrap the line and to convert it into a number. And then you want to print according to what it does. So if you look in our working version here, we have file IO. You can see it's got its usage and its functions, slightly different than the ones we did. That's okay. So we're grading on the functions, not the command line stuff. So we want stats, and we want a file with numbers. Give it the numbers, and it'll compute. And so this should tell you what the output should be. You can see we're taking them as floats, and they should be set to 2 decimal points. And if you look at the alignment, they're aligned a little funny. So you can, these you always know how big they are. So your string for this could have a space and then max. But here, if I want to know how these are aligned, are they tab aligned or are we just aligning them to a certain number of characters? Just look 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So they're kind of aligned, the 11. Remember, that's kind of in the string formatting. So if I wanted 94.00 here, so normally if I were just to print that S, right? It's just going to print it out at the beginning. I want to align it, 11 spaces over, right? Drop it into an F string. And so this is still the same thing, but we want to format it. So grab the colon, go to the right, 11, and it moves them over. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And so that means, we can have numbers up to this many before it causes any problems. Again, the mean, you can calculate it by, the total of all values over the number of all values. All right, and that is the lab for this week. Good luck, guys.